Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here. Today we're going to be going over the details that were posted for the Final Fantasy XVI DLC over on the Square Enix blog. Now, we were expecting Final Fantasy XVI DLC to come out of the Game Awards. I mean, Clive's JP voice actor outright posted, I heard there were rumors that there was going to be an announcement in December, so I guess I better finish the game. Come on, he's the voice actor. That's like taboo number one. You can't just say, I heard rumors of this. Everyone's going to expect it at that point. Well, we did end up getting our DLC announcements at the Game Awards. What was the big surprise is how soon it is coming. In fact, the first DLC, Echoes of the Fallen, is already out. I played it. I beat it. I thought it was pretty good. And the next one's going to be in spring of 2024, conspicuously around the same time we're expecting the Final Fantasy XIV and 16 collaboration. Now, that's all well and good. We got the trailers, and now we have some additional details that Square Enix has decided to share, including certain design decisions, why they decided to do DLC, and why they decided to do DLC on the specific things that are mentioned in this. Now, before I go any further, if you have not played Final Fantasy XVI, it is unavoidable that there will be spoilers here. There is straight up one thing that is automatically a spoiler if you haven't played the game. So I am warning you now, if you do not want to hear about this, you shouldn't have clicked on this video in the first place, and you should click away now, because I'm not going to hold back. I expect everyone watching this video to have beaten the game and for me to be able to talk freely about the things they reference here. They do. I need to be able to as well. So there's your warning. And with that, let's get into Echoes of the Fallen. And I always forget if it's Rise of the Tides or the Rising Tide. The Rising Tide. There we go. It's only been out a day. I can't be expected to remember it entirely. So the beginning of the post just goes over the fact that, would you look at that? Echoes of the Fallen is already out. It sends Clive and his allies on a new mission up the treacherous Sage Spire, a mysterious fallen ruin that houses a terrifying new threat. It's available today as part of the 16 expansion pass or as a standalone purchase. For those of you wondering, the standalone for Echoes of the Fallen is $9.99 USD. The expansion pass combined is $25 USD or $24.99. And we'll get into that pricing a little bit later in the video. The next DLC, The Rising Tide, was also announced. This massive chapter full of content introduces a fan favorite icon to the story of Final Fantasy XVI, Leviathan. Final Fantasy XVI DLC director Takeo Kujiroka has shared details about what to expect. This is separate from the game's main director in that of Hiroshi Takai. We're sharing unique insights and need-to-know details below. So, it's interesting that they've chosen these two things because they said they were specifically going to be digging into the dark and mysterious parts of Clive's story. And the two things that everyone wanted to know, what the heck was that door for in the dim, and where the heck is Leviathan? And it seems they nailed at exactly what we wanted to find out. You have to assume, and they're going to get into that even before reading this post, that they intended those to be bits that they could maybe dive into later, but that weren't necessarily crucial to the story. Now, that may be what they assume, but the Leviathan thing was almost the biggest problem in all of Final Fantasy XVI. So it coming as a DLC, expected, but a little bittersweet, because I think we all would have much preferred that to have been explained in the main game, but maybe they'll explain why it wasn't a part of the main game, why was it Leviathan the Lost, what is going on there. I mean, we have to assume it's going to answer those questions. What is Echoes of the Fallen? This is the first DLC. I have played it, and it was a lot of fun. About 2 to 3 hours if you're good at action games, at least on Final Fantasy mode, and I wasn't even max level. They raised the max level to 105. I was only level 85, and I managed to get through without too much trouble. I've seen people who will have a little bit more trouble with the action style, or maybe just haven't played it in a while, taking another hour or so. Plus, you could play it on Ultimaniac mode, and then there's people who will be going through it as they're actually just progressing the story for the first time, so it'll feel like a little bit of an extension into things. This new DLC for Final Fantasy XVI takes place prior to the game's epic finale, and begins when Clive and company discover a strange dark crystal, one of a color they've never seen before. The investigation leads Clive, Jill, Joshua, and Torgal to the Sage Spire, a ruin of the Fallen that contains many secrets and many more dangers. This terrifying tower contains many challenging foes and some very valuable loot, including new accessories that will change the way you play. And let me tell you, they're pretty phenomenal accessories. And at the top of that, top is the most dangerous foe of them all, Omega. This was a fantastic thing. And there was something I was debating mentioning here. There is a detail about Omega's theme here that I was debating until I read it, and they're going to be going over Omega's theme itself because it's familiar. So to start Echoes of the Fallen, they make sure to put this here, and this will pop up in game once you have both downloaded Echoes of the Fallen and installed about a 10 gigabyte update. So make sure you do both of those things separately. You need to complete the side story quest Priceless, and well, Priceless is actually the only one that's technically required. Where There's a Will is the prerequisite to Priceless, so technically both of those quests need to be done. And then on top of that, you need to have the final mission available, and you must have, and then it says Where There's a Will, cut from the cloth phoenix, thy heal thyself. Series of quests that eventually allows Joshua and Jill to permanently join the party. You need those quests done. Even if you did them on New Game, you need to do them again on New Game Plus to unlock Echoes of the Fallen. So bear that in mind. Now, then it'll pop up and it'll send you over to Charon. Now, how this DLC came to be, this is the interesting bit. I don't think anyone expected the DLC to be out 6 months after the game's release, given, and they will reiterate this here, that they said they weren't even going to release DLC unless the community, unless the fans demanded it. I'm going to interject a little bit of, I guess, not prediction or speculation. Yeah, a little bit of speculation that regardless of whether we wanted it or not, it appeared they had a pretty extensive planning already done, and that is supported here. So much so that, quite frankly, I don't know that it would have depended. I mean, I guess 6 months of dev time is a cost to consider, but they couldn't have just decided from nothing to have had this done prior. They had to have had some of this stuff done prior to, the last 6 months, I feel. That's just my own personal opinion and speculation now. Echoes of the Fallen is the first paid DLC, which will have new costumes, following a free update, which included new costumes for Clive, Jill, Joshua, Torgal, and Ambrosia. But DLC wasn't a foregone conclusion. In fact, the team wasn't sure whether they would do any at all, and they didn't want to use DLC as a crutch when developing the main story. Fair, although again, with what I said with Leviathan, doesn't really feel that way entirely. In an interview with Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu, the development team shared they didn't want to presume the DLC would be created for this title. Outfit changes were discussed, but more serious conversations for DLC didn't occur until halfway through development. Halfway through development, considering they said this technically started in Heavensward, that's a pretty long time ago. I have to assume there's a part where they considered it active development and that it's halfway through that, but I'm only reading what it says. Content will be based on elements they wanted to explore further, such as the Sage Spire or the Icon Leviathan. However, the decision to develop additional content was ultimately contingent on player demand. After gauging initial reactions, the team were able to bring these ideas to fruition. Then it goes over why Omega, and it's just, that's it. Initially, the plan was to have a completely different original boss. However, through our conversations as we worked through the details of the story, we came to think that players might enjoy it more if we included a familiar foe. This was actually a complaint myself and many others had. While there are absolutely staples to Final Fantasy and a lot of enemies we can directly identify from 14 in particular, some of the major classics were missing entirely, not least of all the Tonberry, who we know is in the second DLC, and that of the Rising Tide. So, giving us a familiar boss, I agree with that decision. I love original bosses, but I think this was the right time to pull back on one based on that common complaint. It was then that we settled upon Omega. Players have a strong impression of Omega as a mighty foe, and it was the perfect fit of the theme for the Fallen. So everyone was in unanimous agreement. But Omega has appeared as a strong enemy in multiple Final Fantasy games. That's why we decided to be quite faithful to the image of Omega that has been built up in these other games during the first half of the battle to make players really feel like they're fighting the Omega that they know. Then in the second half, we created a dramatic remix in both terms of appearance and fighting style that really creates an Omega unique to 16. And that it absolutely does. Now, this is the part I wasn't sure if I would bring up in this video. The Omega soundtrack is a remix of Escape from Final Fantasy XIV. It pulls elements of that, and it pulls elements from the Azazla theme, both of which are prevalent throughout the actual Omega theme. Azazla is already somewhat featured in some of the Omega raids in the earlier parts in Final Fantasy XIV. I wasn't expecting something so overt. Like in the base game, you can catch like the Eureka theme being present, and you can catch certain other bits, and there are certain bosses that share similar kind of styles. It feels like Soken's trying to create a style for all of the icons or primals or whatever each respective game calls them, something that we really only get for Gilgamesh. I mean, Battle at Big Bridge is one of the most popular themes. There's dozens of versions of it, and there's not really been an enemy since that that has its own iconic theme that's recurring in some capacity. Yeah, Sephiroth is one-winged angel. You know, you have the like final boss themes. But, I mean, Gilgamesh is something special. And it seems like Soken's trying to recreate that same specialness across the different aspects of 16, or at least kind of show a pattern that intends to do that, so that generations to come of different composers and different directors can have this sort of continuity where someone goes, that's it, that's the theme, I expected something like that, and get some real like hype and motivation out of it, and some form of consistency across the franchise in that one regard. Escape, of course, features, like I said here, with Omega. You can listen to the Primals perform the original track and your eardrums will thank you. In the main game, the world has a medieval European feel with a predominantly orchestral soundtrack. On the other hand, the Sage Spire is a ruin from the Age of the Fallen, a civilization that was far more advanced than Clive's era. As such, we intentionally set out to create something that felt distinct from the main game, both in terms of the world we were depicting and the soundtrack. The Omega battle takes place with against the backdrop of the cybernetic world, and I wanted the music to reflect that. So when requesting the soundtrack, I asked to change the genre to something like a futuristic and upbeat digital rock sound. From there, Soken went away and built his own impression and sense of Omega as it appears in 16. As a result, the final track of the Omega theme is an arrangement of the Omega theme from Final Fantasy XIV Escape. It's quite a drastic rearrangement, it sure is, and there's no narrative connection. They make sure to say that there's no narrative connection, but I imagine it will be fun for players of 14 to listen and track it compared to the version that they know. Yeah, I already saw like a bunch of theories that this more confirms that 16 and 14 are part of the same thing. It's worth mentioning that Omega is supposed to be an interdimensional cross-game opponent. 14's is a bit isolated in that regard, but there's the long-standing theory that the Omega that we encounter inside of Final Fantasy XIV is just kind of the end result of all the Omegas we fought in the rest of the franchise. Although I think Final Fantasy XII's Ultimania more suggests that the Omega of 12 is the original one and it creates the Omegas that go to the other universes, but that's trying to deal with all the that's like a ultra like meta thing to talk about. This, it's just, bro, there's one in 14, there's one in 16, don't think about it anymore. That's about it. And then this just goes into the combat of the DLC itself. They said because they weren't planning on adding new abilities with the first DLC, they decided to add the accessories that can drastically change your playstyle, and there are quite a few. There's one that gives you a massive amount of bonus damage whenever you land a precision dodge, and also lowers the cooldowns of your skills. There's one that raises the cap of your stagger damage to 2 times damage, or 200%. And even unlocks double impact, which from what I could tell, actually caused all of your hits to count twice, which was pretty cool. And there's a few other things like a parry related one. Basically, if there's a way you love playing, it takes it to another level or encourages you to try another style. So I do like that approach, though I was hard pressed to get rid of the accessories I already had, except for that double impact one. I had to go with that because I love to stack up to the 150% and then just go bam, 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 and just wipe out the whole health bar in one quick go. Yeah, the aerial bit increases the amount of damage to the will gauge by 20% and triples the maximum number of times Clive can stomp to kick off enemies. Yeah, up to 6. That one was really cool, and I definitely consider that because I also like permanently fight in the air most of the time in this game. If you've already played 16, you might have a certain ability set that's mostly set in stone. If so, you're exactly the kind of player I'm hoping to enjoy exploring some different options with the new accessories. If you enjoy playing arcade mode, it may open up some new ways to approach some existing stages. Then for Echoes of the Fallen, it talks about the actual story. Apparently, it's very little compared to what they could have actually told us. Apparently, they said that they have so much lore for the Fallen, they could make a whole nother game out of it if they wanted to. This is not the first time they've said that. Koji himself has said they would have to make a whole nother game to dig into all the aspects, and he said maybe that's something in the future. They don't know. But for now, it's just things they've done in order to kind of develop the world and make sure that it's full and fun and exactly what you'd expect from Final Fantasy. Here, they intentionally left some places where players can use their imagination to speculate on what else may have come before. I won't be surprised if we get a lore book equivalent to Final Fantasy 16 just based on the number of times they've said this versus another game. I feel like that's more feasible. Recommend paying close attention to the environment of the Sage Spire and the details in the active time lore. Hey, yo, the new active time lore stuff and the new stuff you can do at the State of the Realm, please go look at Torgal's thoughts. Please go do it. I love the little... I mean, all the thoughts are great, but Torgal's thoughts in particular makes me sad. I'm sure you'll uncover even more intriguing information about Valstia. Oh yeah. DLC is designed to be replayable. That depends on what you define as replayable. Realistically, if you're not doing arcade mode, I don't think most people will play through it more than a single time, except in subsequent playthroughs that they do years down the line. But the battles have been made to feel satisfying and challenging. First and foremost, the boss of Omega. The new stage will be added to arcade mode, and Final Fantasy mode will support it in Ultimaniac. I still have to do that, and I will get around to that soon. Then we have the Rising Tide, the second DLC. The name, the Rising Tide, it sees Clive finally encounter the delightfully damp the damp deity. Earn the ability to utilize its power. We saw that in the trailer for the joint DLC. It will include the new, and then the expansion pass includes both this and the Echoes of the Fallen. I'd assume this would be $20 because they said that the expansion pass is discounted if you buy both. So I'd assume this would be standalone $20 when it does eventually come out. So for the second DLC, we've tried to keep the first DLC a relatively compact experience. More so what I was trying to say before. That we could tell a new story in the world of 16 as soon as possible after the initial release. So they're basically saying that the scope of the first DLC is so they could get that first DLC out within a reasonable time frame, hence the 6 months that we mentioned earlier. Of course, I mentioned my own speculation, but it is what it is. That's what they're saying they did. But since we're taking a bit more time to work on the second DLC, we'll be cramming it full of content. So allow me to tell you about it with quite a bit of depth. Firstly, the second DLC will be a story about Leviathan, who is only mentioned by name in the main game. It will include a side quest to explore the lore in detail, including the reason why Leviathan hasn't appeared up to this point. It is one of the grandest mysteries of Final Fantasy XVI. How any of the plot even makes sense if one of the major icons is just missing from the game. So, very important that you explain why Leviathan wasn't there. The fight with Leviathan has to be seen to be believed, so keep your hopes high for a real spectacle. We also added a new field area for the DLC with beautiful blue skies stretching out above. How can there be blue skies in Valestia, which is covered by the Ark? All will be revealed. Regardless of the reason, I hope you'll enjoy a journey under the great blue sky with Joshua and Jill by your side. The appearance of a new icon also means Clive obtains a new power, Leviathan's iconic feats and abilities, which are completely different to other icons with unique effects. It almost looked like a paladin, like a sword and shield style like play. At least that's what it looked like to me. I got to go back through the trailer and really analyze it. The combat team headed by combat director Ryota Suzuki has taken a huge amount of care when creating these new additions to make sure they will seamlessly fit into 16's combat system, while also being strong enough to make players want to select Leviathan as one of the 3 icons in their loadout. Actually, in the save file I used to playtest the game, I have Leviathan set as one of my icons. It's so strong, I can recommend the abilities for completing the story and arcade mode. And finally, gaining Leviathan's power will mean that all of the powers of the icons have come together. What will happen to Clive when that happens? I think we get a different ending. So this also takes place before the end of the game, according to, well, not actually according to this. I think according to the PlayStation blog, it also says that this is set before the final encounter, whereas I don't think it actually says it here. But they said it was to keep the ending intact. But a major part of the ending is how Clive basically says he's still not strong enough to survive. But now he's going to have Leviathan. And I'd assume that means the Ultima fight's also going to have a Leviathan phase. Like, I'd assume that the final boss changes to some capacity once we actually have Leviathan. So I wonder if they actually do change the end of the game with this. Not something I'm a huge fan of, mind you, because I want to believe that the way it ended was the way they always wanted it to end. So the idea of writing a new ending, like, it kind of worked for 15. I think a lot of people enjoyed the alternate ending of 15 they got from DLC. But with this, I don't know. It doesn't ring quite the same for me. I'm quite content with the way it ended, but I know there are people who always want that happy ending. So we'll have to see, but something is going to happen when you get this. We can also assume that Leviathan would come with his own chronolith trial. Not that that's anything major, but it's also worth considering. I'm hard pressed to imagine we won't have it. I can't talk about that in any detail, but I can tell you that we've got even more in store for you to look forward to. So I hope you look forward to the release of the Rising Tide. Whew. So that is our little post here on Echoes of the Fallen and Rising Tide. I'm quite excited. Like I said, I enjoyed Echoes of the Fallen. I think that in terms of its length, it's a little short if you're good at the game, but I'll get at least 5 to 6 hours out of it with Ultimaniac, which is not the worst for $9.99. I'm excited to actually get to explore Leviathan as well in spring, and hopefully that'll be around the time the Final Fantasy XIV collab is happening as well. With that, thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And I'll probably be making a video about the updated arcade mode, as well as any other news we get about 16 in the coming months ahead of the second DLC. But thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care.